Hello and welcome to Round the Table Live with Christian Concern. And today we are talking about the excellent case of Kristie Higgs, school worker who's sacked for gross misconduct for expressing concerns about sex education on Facebook. And I'm joined today by Andrea Williams, our chief executive, and also by Michael Phillips, one of our top lawyers from the Christian Legal Centre. Great to see you guys. Thanks for joining us today. Now, this is a really important case, and I think we got the result from the Employment Appeal Tribunal just last week on Friday. So here we are. This is the first round the table that we can properly discuss it today. I think it's a very significant win in that Employment Appeal Tribunal last week, with repercussions for many of our cases and many free speech cases being recognised by other people as well. Andrea, can you just remind us what actually happened to this lady, Kristie Higgs?
Yes, well, like so many of our clients, well, in fact, like all of our clients, that's actually the truth. Kristie is a wonderful human, a wonderful Christian, someone that really loves Jesus. Kristie also just happens to be in her nature very gentle, very timid, very shy. Whenever she's asked to speak about her case in public, her first instinct is to say, "I can't." I'm just trying to paint who these kinds of things happen to. She was a pastoral assistant in a school. She loved that job. She'd been a pastoral assistant for 7 years. She was helping the children in the school who'd been excluded. She was a greatly loved member of staff and very popular amongst the students. And indeed, when I went to see her in her home village, people said hi to her. I mean, kids said hi to her from the school. She was great. She was loved. And indeed, after this all happened, they sent her flowers and put chocolates on her doorstep.
Wow.
So I'm painting the picture of who she is, of who Kristie is. She's precious woman who loved her job in a school as a pastoral worker. She had 2 sons. One of them was in the secondary school. The other one was still in the primary school. So the secondary school where she worked, farmers school. The other school was the feeder school for this school. And she learned that that they were going to be doing some sex ed and that there was going to be books that were going to be read. She was one of 2 people that went in, that a notice was sent around and by the head teacher and said, you can come and view the materials if you would like. So she went, another grandmother went. And when she saw the books that were going to be used, which were essentially promoting transgender ideology, she became, a red crane can be a blue crane, and just really this kind of muddling concepts for children, and also fairly flagrant LGBT themed books that were going to be prevalent in that school and taught to the children. She felt very concerned about it. So she went home. She put out a Facebook post. She wasn't a massively prolific social media person, but she did have a group of friends on her Facebook. She would put things out of interest, very often Christian things. And she said, do we know what's going on in our schools? Look, these books are being promoted. And what she did was she forwarded a petition from Citizen Go that was outlining the concern around these books. And that also linked to some comment articles around these books. Then an anonymous...
And just to be clear, Andrea, she put her Facebook account's actually in her maiden name.
Yes.
With no link to the school that she works for or worked for.
Yes. That's right, Tim. So the thing is, we all know that Facebook isn't private. And she knew that, but essentially it was to her friends. It was what she always did. She's got a group of friends putting out what's happening at school, Christian motivational verses, this kind of thing. And she put out, are we concerned about our children?
Yeah.
She was then reported by one of her friends, and
about
her Facebook post, said that it was discriminatory, homophobic, transphobic, that these views were. these views were not. How could someone hold these sorts of views in 21st century Britain? This went to the master of Farmer School where she was working, basically questioning how they could have someone working in the school that held these kind of homophobic, transphobic, so-called homophobic, transphobic views. Now, this person reported Kristie, and let me say this person, we don't know who this person is. We're 5 years later, that person has never been spoken to by us or had to actually speak to Kristie, find out what accused her of being homophobic and transphobic. She then is immediately suspended. She then goes under an investigatory process. And of course, at this point, she's not with us. We don't know about this case. That investigatory process, I don't want to be imprecise. Mike might remember the detail better than me, but it was something like 6 hours long. And when she described it to us, she said, I was shaking. I was really frightened. I had to leave every now and then because I was so traumatized. And indeed, one of the things that we saw in the early stages of this case was whenever she tried to recount what happened, she'd be triggered, relived the trauma of being in that disciplinary session with the governors and the head. Mm-hmm. And during that period, during that investigation meeting, she was at her views, which are you, as I said, she is the most beautiful Christian who, if you go to her home, it's so serene and there's, love is put a big loving Jesus is just everywhere. That's what she's like, the softest person ever. But her views were likened to that of a Nazi. So this is the kind of thing that she was being subjected to. And then at the disciplinary hearing, Ms. Dorey, who was chairing this was what she found. This is in paragraph 12 of the judgment. By choosing to make the posts and stating that she believes in God's law and not man's law, so that's what Kristie had stated, I believe that on the balance of probabilities, this means that she holds views that are discriminatory against groups of people with protected characteristics. Whilst not making any direct discriminatory comments about students at Farmer School, so there was an acceptance, there was no direction of these views at all at any person, the posts used discriminatory language. So saying we believe in God's law, not man's law, becomes discriminatory language and are endorsed by Kristie, which would indicate that she shares these views. On the balance of probability, this would be interpreted, important distinction there, this would be interpreted that she holds illegal discriminatory views that are not in line with the Equality Act. And at paragraph 14, again, as it is an issue raised on appeal, it's relevant to note that Ms. Dorey said in evidence as to why she considered that she should proceed to a disciplinary hearing. In cross-examination, Ms. Dorey confirmed that she concluded that Kristie could have discriminatory views and that she may have broken the code of conduct by holding illegal discriminatory views. A reader of the posts would infer that she holds discriminatory beliefs because she does not believe in same-sex marriage and gender fluidity. So you hold those views, you discriminate, you breach the Equality Act according to the panel, you are dismissed for gross misconduct. And that's really where the story begins. And that was in 2018. That is 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think she made the posts in 2018 and then ended up losing her job for gross misconduct early 2019.
Yes,
and here we are. And she lost in the Employment Tribunal, which is a few years ago now. And then finally that came to the Employment Appeal Tribunal, and we finally got the ruling last Friday on that. And she won at that, although it has to be referred back for another hearing. So the time continues, and it all continues along with her not being able to work in a school. Now, Mike, and by the way, if you're watching live, do ask questions about this case if you've got them, because it'd be great to hear from you, and we'll try and see them up there. But Mike, tell us about this judgment now from the Employment Appeal Tribunal. Why did it say the Employment Tribunal erred or got it wrong? And how significant is this ruling and what's happened?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is very important because these kind of cases are just to a penny at the moment. I would say that almost probably 75% of cases involving the Christian Legal Centre involved schools in some way, either their teachers or students or pupils or pastoral assistants. Yeah. And so people have outside lives. They go on to Facebook very often. Facebook mums are to a penny as well at these kinds of schools. And if not Twitter or whatever social media site that you're on, and occasionally you will just repost something which you like and you don't analyze it. You don't think about it. You don't think, is it likely that some of my friends or people who are friends of my friends might possibly see this and make an anonymous report to my employer? And so this is what a lot of people do. And this is just what she did. She just posted something which had strong language, and so what? And as a result of that reposting, she gets herself into trouble. And so the court in the first instance didn't really kind of analyze things properly. And that's where they fell a cropper, because when you say something and somebody else gets offended, you have to look at it. You just have to perform a bit of an assessment. And the way of looking at it is that you shouldn't be making a mountain out of a molehill. And if this really is a molehill, then in those circumstances, it should be treated as a molehill and not a mountain. But this was very extreme what happened to her, because ordinarily most courts will say, most employers will say, you can believe whatever you want, that's absolutely fine, but just the way in which you expressed it was just so abhorrent on this occasion, and that's why we had to do what we did. But on this occasion, they went a little bit further, and it wasn't just the manner of expression, which is what we normally see, but it was also holding the beliefs themselves, which was, and that's really very often what employers and what schools are getting at. They don't even want you to hold these beliefs. You've got to have one set of beliefs, which the higher echelons of a school will hold. And
interesting that Andrea said illegal opinions was the view of the investigator or the headmaster.
That's just wrong in law. But I mean that's the point. I mean the way in which it often just gets worked out, although it's not the truth very often. It's not the truth if you've been living the cases, is that, you can hold those views, but don't express them in this forum and in this way. Yeah. But here, their error was to say straight up, she held these views, she believed in God's law, not man's law, that's discriminatory. So that was, and they said that straight up.
Yeah, and
carry on,
Mike.
They
were a little bit more honest than what is normally the case, which in some ways was good.
Yes.
Because very often people are advised by their HR or by lawyers to say, listen, don't say you can't hold these views, but just don't express them in that way. But here we have that very honest admission by those people. So that's what happened here. And so what the court didn't do is they didn't perform any kind of analysis and say, was this the right thing to do in this situation? They call it the reason why. Was the reason why she was sacked, was it because of her faith? And if you don't perform that analysis, then basically you've made a mistake in law. And so they overturned the decision. But unfortunately, what they didn't do is they didn't kind of make up the decision themselves and say, well, look, it's obvious to us what needs to happen is this. And so therefore we will, there's no need to send it back, but we're going to send it right back to square one. So it's a bit like a game of snakes and ladders, where you're nearly at the top and you've nearly got the cup, and then you go down a ladder right to the very bottom again. So in one sense, it is a fantastic victory, and we would say it's obvious what should happen now, and there was no need for the matter to be remitted. But sadly, the judge decided that we have to have it remitted, sent back for a retrial, and then hopefully then win.
Possibly by the same panel.
Possibly, and which would be,
I mean that in terms of just, so, and I think that again, so what you want to see there is that there are ideological forces at play, whether or not the people that are the actors, whether or not it's the people who are doing the disciplining, whether it's the governing body, whether or not it's the Employment Appeal Judge President. What you've actually got is a situation where ideological forces, factors are at play. So here, evidently, there was an error on the face of the evidence and on the face of the facts. And rather than remitting, there should have just been a straight up vindication. This was direct discrimination because she held those particular views. It was said They said that these views were discriminated. Well, you can't discriminate on that basis.
Mm.
And I just think that just generally we have this wholesale lack of understanding because of and again here, it's because of the failure of, yes, the institutional church, and I don't just mean the Church of England, I mean the church, the broader church in the United Kingdom, to help people understand what faith is and what believing in faith is, that it's not a private matter, that it has moral implications, it has an outworking, which means that you believe that there is a how now to live, there is a way to live, which believes that marriage is between a man and woman, which believes that you're made male and female, which believes in God's law, not man's law, and that these are the outworkings of it. We have failed in our I love the church, but it's as if nobody understands that part of faith, part of belief is to believe these things. That's straight up.
So Mike, one of the there are many interesting factors about this case, but one of them that we want to talk about today is that the Church of England, through the Archbishop's Council, intervened in this case at the Employment Appeal Tribunal. Tell us about that, because I found it very, very strange. They intervened and were at pains to say we're strictly neutral about whether we think Christie was mistreated or not, which you'd have thought if they're going to intervene, they would come in and defend the Christian.
Yeah, they did. They did intervene, which is an extremely unusual thing to happen in any kind of case. I mean, it's usually just the aggrieved and the employer, and that's it. But here they spend, we imagine a considerable amount of money employing quite expensive lawyers in order to intervene, in order to put their thoughts in. And so really what they were saying is that, yes, on the one hand, there is freedom of speech and people should be permitted to say certain things. But, you've got to be reasonable about these things. You've got to be moderate about these things. If you're unnecessarily provocative and so on, then in those circumstances, then maybe you might lose that right to freedom of speech. And so what happened is that they gave a series of pointers to the Employment Appeal Tribunal, which really cut and pasted into the final paragraph of the judgment. And it's really about, I guess a lot of them are a matter of common sense. And we would say, yeah, no, that's fine. A lot of them are common sense and aren't particularly bad. But
here they are, like the content of manifestation, the tone used, the extent of the manifestation, the worker's understanding, the likelihood. I mean, all of us, just generally in life, you would hope that we're all, of course,
we're all like that. But the thing is that what I would say is that, to lose your job if you go slightly over the mark, or to get yourself arrested because you go slightly over the mark, that is, these are good guidelines in the sense that, this is how most of the time, most of us behave. But if you should not be losing your job because you expressed something or you reposted something which is maybe slightly provocative, because that's the whole purpose of life, isn't it? That's the whole purpose of free speech. In order to think, we have to risk being offensive. And if you can't risk being offensive,
I think what's interesting, Tim, is paragraph 93 of the judgment here, where at least here the judge, Judge Edie, I think puts the church in its place a bit.
Right.
For my part, I consider that a danger can arise from any attempt to lay down general guidelines in cases such as this. Which is what I found to be hilarious. I'm sorry to be sounding a bit flippant about this. Was when their counsel stood up with this kind of 13-point. I think it was 13 points, 12 or 13 points. Ideas of how you should behave. The idea that anybody thinks that through when they're just living and working and a mum at home and going into school and dealing with kids all around you, the idea that you're going to go through an analysis of how a proportionality analysis, that's real life. But she said, I consider that a danger can arise from any attempt to lay down general guidelines. Experience suggests that issues arising from the exercise of rights to freedom of religion and belief and to freedom of expression are invariably fact-specific, although the public debate around these issues tends to be conducted through the prism of categories and labels. That is not an approach which can properly inform the decisions taken in individual cases. So there, I read it that she's acknowledging there are these really fundamental, important rights that are upheld in law. Yeah. Freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and those are inalienable. They're absolutely vital. And to state you can start.
Well, as the judge, I think, quoted in the judgment, freedom to just speak inoffensively is not free speech, right? Because who knows who might get offended from what you say. If I say that I don't believe in same-sex marriage, somebody will be offended. But I've just made a statement of fact about my belief.
That's absolutely discriminatory.
I know.
Well, exactly. Someone will say that, So
exactly.
The Church of England is basically saying if somebody might find it offensive or difficult, you shouldn't say it. Well, that means we can't say what we believe.
Well, exactly. I always remember being in a taxi on the way to a conference, and the taxi driver, typical East End of London accent. I won't do the accent. Hasten to add,
Mike has terrible accents. Everyone, he has terrible accents.
And he turned around and he said to us exactly what he thought of various issues, in no uncertain terms. And he didn't mean to be. He wasn't trying to be offensive. He knew that the audience he was speaking to was going to be receptive, and that was fine. But imagine, for example, if we had taken offence and then we'd reported him to Transport for London, and he lost his license to be a taxi driver because that's just how he speaks. He's a working class lad.
That could actually happen.
And that could happen.
Exactly, that could happen. And the CofE would be saying, "No, you must be nice about it, Mr. Taxi Driver. Couldn't you have spoken a bit more? Can you have spoken?"
But Andrea, don't you think that the CofE would actually be saying this to Jesus if they heard him in Matthew 23, right? Yeah. Don't you think that his words, would basically violate all of the CofE's own principles? So they'd be condemning Jesus for not speaking with appropriate tone.
I want to say, this is it. The thing about Kristie and all of our clients. But Kristie is she's very, very mild. We have our street preachers are fiery and out there. She's deeply fiery, but she's quiet. But she was so upset by those books, so angry that her little children, that her son, she's got great, beautiful sons, so upset that her son was going to be taught this stuff in the school, that she put out the post with information to raise the alarm with other parents. Now, surely that's an honourable act, to actually warn parents about what is happening in our schools. And I think that, we've seen, and she has been proved right. That was 2018. In fact, Christian Concern, the Christian Legal Centre, have been proved right. We've been raising this alarm around sex education now for a decade. And, it's worse than we could ever imagine. We were warning. But the idea that this beautiful woman lost her job for simply, and then one of the parts of the story that that comes in the middle is that we were going to have an appeal tribunal. But we found that, first of all, Edward Law was on the panel as a lay member of and he's a pro-trans rights activist, pro-LGBT trans activist. So unless we had been alerted, done our homework, unless there'd been social media so we could see what he thought, and does he lose his job because he's out there as a kind of proud gay activist? No. Does he get disciplined? No. Because he's kind of idolizing the new religion. And that's fine. You won't get punished for promoting that. But we asked for his recusal because we revealed his bias. And then, far more subtly,
we got him recused. He was recused.
We got him recused.
The judge forced him to recuse himself. Yeah.
And then we show up again. We show up again for the hearing and discover that the person that is to be the lay member of the panel has taken a senior position in the union, which was actively promoting LGBT ideology amongst its members and within schools. And so we actually had to get him recused as well. So there was a double recusal because the people that would have been advising the judge were at least would be seen to be biased. Of course, they would argue, well, we can have these views, but we're not biased. Well, imagine
there's a perceived bias, and at least the judge recognised that, and it got them recused of an extraordinary situation there. But just getting back to the Church of England there, my colleague Paul Huxley has just reminded me there that what did Jesus say about people who lead little ones astray? Right, he was pretty harsh about that. He said, you better for you if you have a millstone tied around your neck and hurled into the sea. That's pretty offensive language. Someone might be offended by that, but of course, what is Kristie objecting to? Leading little ones astray, right? That's exactly what she's objecting to, and she's using strong language as Jesus did for that very thing. And the Church of England is saying, no, you should be much more gentle, Kristie. And by the way, what about what Jesus was and how gentle he was? Oh, forget that. It's basically anti-Christian, because they're now opposing Christians in court, and the Church of England guidance has been used against Christians now 3 times in court, hasn't it, Andrea?
They have the Church of England has a terrible record in our cases.
Yeah.
They are used continually against us because their stand on what it means to be a Christian is actually anti-Christian.
Yeah.
They have not stood for Genesis 1. They have not stood clearly for marriage between a man and a woman. Yeah. They have not stood clearly for being made in the image of God, male and female. And we have found ourselves time and again in the courtroom with judges, panels saying, we like the Churches of England's interpretation, the valuing all God's children interpretation of the Bible. Yeah. Bernard Randall, Joshua Sutcliffe, David Macareth, Hannah, Christy Higgs, they're a little bit extreme. Keith Waters, these people are extreme. Mm-hmm. That's the wrong type of Christianity. Well, actually, it's the Jesus Christianity.
Sometimes what happens is that even the good documents that we put before the court from other organizations that we might all know and love, they will then cherry pick the bits which say that you must be nice, you must not discriminate, and they say, well, therefore that means this. And so what happens is that you have the Humpty Dumpty defense wheeled out in front of the tribunal, and they just reinterpret everything, because if you are a nice person, then you wouldn't do this. And so rather than seeing the gospel holistically as something which is on the one hand bad news because we are sinners, but on the other hand good news because we're saved by grace, they just take the second bit and say, well, Christianity is all about redemption, it's all about grace, it's all about forgiveness and so on, which is true, but you can't see it in isolation. But that's what they want to do. And so therefore what you have is a license. Christianity just turns into some type of rubber stamping machine that you just rubber stamp what anybody chooses to believe. And so long as you're not upsetting people, then that's fine. You can be a Christian, but a Christian who doesn't offend people.
Yeah. And what really sort of made it clear, Andrea, is that is his name Reverend Dr. Michael Brown from the Archbishop's Council.
Malcolm
Brown, sorry. And he was interviewed by the Telegraph saying that Christians are being too aggressive in these kind of cases. And it just it's all upside down, because who's the aggressive one here? It's not Christy Higgs, it's her employer, who has gone so far as to accuse you of being liken her to not her views to Nazism and sack her for gross misconduct, as has happened in all of our cases. And we are defending the victim against aggression, and he accuses us of being aggressive. He's clearly, got it completely upside down the way around.
Oh, John Huggins on the chat here says the Church of England is becoming an apostate church. That's right. I think it evidently has around the issue of marriage, and it's happened. Let me say that there are many faithful Anglican ministers up and down the country, many amazing churches and people, but institutionally, corporately, the idea that an institution would spend tens of thousands of pounds doing what they did, essentially to take out, well, I say that Christie happens to be the case, but this was strategic, and it felt attacking on us. And also,
it was, because that's revealed in the Telegraph interview. Because
and our cases, all we have sought to do, all we seek to do, is to defend those who are suffering as a result of standing for Christ. And we've lost an amazing pastoral assistant in a school. She's now working the floor in a garden centre. She loves that, of course, because she's popular, because she's brilliant. She's gorgeous wherever she goes. She's selling shoes. She loves it. She's fabulous at that because she's fabulous. But the point is, we've lost an amazing pastoral assistant, and that is very sad. But the other thing is about this, it's not just their intervention. We found out from the Tortoise Media documentary on us that sought to expose us in some way, but we found out that the Church of England has been meeting with the judiciary supposedly to work out what are we going to do with the Christian Legal Centre, what are we going to do with these.
Actually, he says that in the interview of the Telegraph. He says we were informed that the judiciary are bothered by what we're doing, and so they thought, oh yeah, well, we'll help you, we'll try and sort these Christian people out. And
so bothered because there's an organisation that's standing for freedom of religion, actually freedom of Christianity, that's actually protecting Christy, that's protecting Joshua, that really stands and is counted so that these freedoms do not disappear, so that still we stand, still we say at the heart of our society, that Christianity is worth preserving. It gives true freedom. It never coerces. It won't. If you disagree with Christianity, you won't be punished in the way that we are being punished. And that's why we've got to, these freedoms that come from the history of Christianity, we stand on. We stand on our great heritage, and we hope and we pray that by standing, these freedoms will be preserved. Because let me say, folks, if we don't, and if the lights go out still further, and if this judgment against Christy was allowed to stand, and if nobody speaks about it and no one contends, then we're in a dark place in this nation. We're in Pride Month. Wherever you go, there are pride flags. Go to the supermarket, flags on the walls, wherever you may be. There is this kind of overwhelming sense of being compelled to say yes to this.
Yeah.
To yes to what it represents. But we are here saying we love you. God loves you. There's another way. There's a way that brings freedom and hope and truth and life and light. And it is the Jesus way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, and Mike, this whole subject of sex education, she shared those posts in 2018. Here we are in 2023, and it's really become mainstream. There seems to be a story every week about 100 genders and people now becoming cats or identifying as cats and dinosaurs and moons and crazy things like this, and teaching about oral sex, anal sex, masturbation, etc. It's gone so far that the Prime Minister has done initiated a review or commissioned a review into it. And yet Christy lost her job for raising the very concerns that the Prime Minister is now concerned about. How can it be that a school worker loses her job for raising concerns in what is now a very public debate?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is the government is a very broad church. You've got some people in government who are very sane and very reasonable and are looking to bring in guidelines in order to kind of restore sanity. But at the same time, you've got a lot of people in government, a lot of civil servants, a lot of people who work as teachers, who just, who want to completely and utterly radically transform society. And the best way to change society is through the schools and to get in various thinking, ideologies and so on, because what is the problem with this? If for example we're just products of evolution, and if it is the case that we're all just animals, then we're just reverting to type. So what is the problem? And so this is something in some ways is the fruit of seeds which have been so many years ago, which have moved our education system away from something which was primarily based upon the church and provided by the churches, and bit by bit it has become more and more secular. And so therefore you're right, if you say anything in school, then that is offensive. And this happened to one of our own children.
Paul's commented, Mike, if we're all just animals, then we can all identify as cats, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. The thing is that evolution and the Big Bang and so on are just taught as facts in schools. And if you express a view which is contrary to that, you may get into trouble. I mean, nobody's been particularly worried about that so far because it's not particularly personal. But the ultimate outworking of that is that, you know, this is really a logical conclusion in some ways. And why is it? You know, because evolution would teach and atheism would teach that there is no morality, there is no good, there is no bad, and so on. And so, you know, that's the problem, because unless you are in a system which upholds a system of morality, eventually you will come to this conclusion. And so therefore, the only religion that we're left with is a religion of not being offensive to other people. And so therefore,
it kind of deifies the individual because they can create themselves how they want to be. And therefore we then blaspheme against their identity, be it male, female, cat, dinosaur, whatever, because they have made themselves how they want to be made, and because they are now the creator. That's basically the religion now. It's a religion of self-creation, self-identities, hence the identity politics, all that kind of thing.
And you're right. I mean, the thing is that I mean, it's a product of the postmodern society that we live in. But at the same time, you go down to the science corridor, they will tell you it's an absolute fact. Evolution is a fact. But at the same time, you go down to the social services, social sciences corridor, then they will say, no, you know, you can believe whatever you want to believe, and that could be completely contradictory to the person next to you. And that's fine.
It isn't a fact. So, as in, so science is a fact, and they say, and evolution, and evolution is a fact, and we came from monkeys. That's a fact. But biological sex is not a fact.
Yeah, and so this is why we're in a slightly strange situation where, so for example, someone like Richard Dawkins, who's been the nemesis of Christians for many years, is now in a position where, in some ways, he's more aligned with what Christians believe than what atheists believe. But you know, because I think he was kicked out of the National Humanist Association for expressing the view that there are two genders. So we now find ourselves in a situation being aligned with, you know, feminists and atheists and so on, who are scientists who say, no, this is going too far, you know, but this is the product really of what they sowed many years ago. And they're now beginning to say, and the latest interview that I saw with Richard Dawkins, he was beginning to slightly rein back, you know, some of his criticisms that he made of religion, because he realizes that actually this is the product of that atheistic secular mindset.
What I love about Christianity is that it's so rational.
Yeah.
We believe by faith, and we know, and when we repent of our sin and say thank you to Christ for dying on the cross for our sin, then we know his glorious peace and redemption and forgiveness. But also every single thing about Christianity makes sense of the world. Yeah. It's totally coherent. So it makes sense of science. Science never contradicts Christianity. And it also makes sense of who we are, and it makes sense of how to live in a way that makes society free, in a way that makes society flourish.
Yeah.
So, listen, Mike, to sort of start rounding up now. What happens next? Okay, so we've won at this employment appeal tribunal. Now it's being referred back. So what happens next, and how long will that all take?
Well, it's a little bit unclear at the moment, because of the way that the court wants it to go is it to be remitted to the same people that dismissed the case in the first place, which is a matter of common sense. That doesn't really seem entirely fair, that you go back to the very people who made the mistake in the first place. So I think that, if we do go back and we have a retrial, it's certainly going to be the case that any reasonable person would say, well, look, we're going to have a fresh set of tribunal members to look at this afresh. But at the same time as well, there's maybe also potentially an appeal there to say, look, is it right to say that we have these very restrictive guidelines? Maybe we need to go to the Court of Appeal and say, look, the whole point about freedom of speech is the ability to be offensive, And I remember when Keir Starmer was a barrister, he took a famous case involving flag burning outside an American Air Force base in Mildenhall, and they lost, but they won on appeal with Keir Starmer's help, because he said, listen, the whole point about protest is that you can offend people, and protesters understand that they want to get their message across. So we burn an American flag outside an American Air Force base. What better way to make our point? And the judge in that case, in the first instance, said, well, you could have done it in a less insulting way. Of course you could have done. But the point is this, is that they knew how to get their message across. So we must be allowed to sometimes be insulting and offensive, because that's how you make your point. And if you can't make your point, you won't change culture, you won't change law, etc. So we must be permitted, not just us, but this benefits other people as well. whether it's just stop oil or whatever. So I would say that there's potentially an appeal, and also potentially a retrial as well. But unfortunately, one thing is for certain: the case is not going to be ending anytime soon.
How long will it take? How long do you think it will take, Mike?
Well, it could be another couple of years. In fact,
really?
It could be 2-3 years. I mean, sometimes if we end up in the Supreme Court or in the European Court of Human Rights, we could be another 10 years, dealing with this case. But the thing is that if you find yourself in that position, you cannot give up. You cannot give up.
We're not going to give up. And let me just.
Of course, we're not going to. Yeah.
The thing about it really is, Michael has there outlined really important freedom concepts as outworked at high level law.
In court. Yeah.
But we've got to remember that the gospel, just the gospel, in and of itself is an offence to many that don't believe.
Yeah.
And that's why the task of the church is to teach the glorious good news that is the gospel. I mean, that's a kind of that's a contradiction, isn't it? That it's good news and it's an offence. But that is what it is. And I think that it's, our clients love. I mean, Christy loves, and it's held that it's held that because it's held that she what she did or what she believes is offensive, but she loves.
And that's the irony in all of this, is that the most loving thing in the world is to be very offensive, and people don't necessarily understand that. But when, for example,
let's say someone they're a sinner, let's say someone they need forgiveness. I mean, that's forgiveness. That's offensive, isn't it?
Oh, we understand that. The thing is this: is that, sometimes when I'm presenting a case to a client, and I tell them the truth, they find it extremely offensive. But it would be wrong of me, it'd be unloving of me to be dishonest with them and not tell them the truth about their case. But likewise, if you're a Christian, you really do believe that this is the truth, and that there is an eternity, and there is good, and there is evil, and there is the demonic realm, and there is the angelic realm, and there really are real consequences for our actions in this life. So the most loving thing to do in that situation is to tell another person, this is actually the situation that you are in. And so that is, it is offensive, but it's a loving offense.
And indeed, to warn parents about what is happening to their children, which is exactly what Kristie Higgs was doing in the first instance, or intending to do in the first instance with her Facebook post. Listen, I think that's been a great discussion. I'm conscious of time, but I think we've covered a lot of ground there. And gosh, what a state the Church of England is in when they're actively opposing Christians in courts. It's an awful position for them to be in, I think, and no doubt God will judge it. Listen.
Can I shout out really just to say big thanks to everyone at Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Centre. Well done to Kristie, but I'm so proud of the team. Thanks, Tim, for all that you do in policy. Thanks, Michael, for all that you do with the lawyers of the Christian Legal Centre team generally. Just amazing work by this team in standing up for gospel truth in our nation at this time, never relenting, never giving up over many years. Here we stand. We can do nothing else but stand. And
if we're into thank yous, Andrea, we have to thank you, of course, for setting up in the first place and organising it and so on. But I don't want to prolong with more thank yous, but many more thank yous could be done. And thank you to all of you for watching. If you're not already signed up, do go to christianconcern.com/hello and sign up for our regular free weekly emails. Follow us on all the various social media channels, and we'll look forward to connecting with you again next week. Thank you very much.